Magic is changing more rapidly than ever. The original collectible card game is now the juggernaut keeping Hasbro afloat, and with that comes a lot of expectations and even more announcements. Most recently, Wizards took to the stage to share an especially exciting batch of news with Magic players, including the anticipated return to the use of MSRP, as well as a look into the newest iteration of core sets and some teasers for the next batch of Magic products that will release over the course of the next year or two. Unsurprisingly, many of these announcements were met with enthusiasm, but you've likely noticed by now that enthusiasm has been drowned out by an uproar over a far more noteworthy announcement. Wizards has announced they'll be moving to a new release schedule that pushes out a full 6 sets per year, of which 50% will be Universes Beyond and 100% will be standard legal. This has profound implications for the future of the game, perhaps more than any other event or announcement Wizards has ever made. And people have understandably been in an uproar, with many players fiercely defending these changes as ultimately harmless, while others insist that this likely means the end of Magic as we know it. The truth is, this announcement is a blatant contradiction to the assurances Wizards has given to players since the inception of Universes Beyond, and longtime players are understandably feeling betrayed, including community figureheads such as Tolarian Community College and Ristic Studies, who have voiced their concerns far more eloquently than I ever could, drawing upon their decades of experience with the game to articulate exactly how Magic has begun to lose some of its soul. But if you're a newer Magic player, or perhaps just a bit more of a casual fan of the game, you may not share many of these concerns, and if you fall into that camp, it can be a little frustrating to see so much negative sentiment in the face of Magic's overwhelming success. This is partially because newer Magic players aren't always sitting down at the table with the same goals as die-hard Magic fans, and perhaps more importantly, newer players, especially those that started playing after the popularization of Universes Beyond, may not have the same ideas in mind when it comes to what Magic is. For newer players, Magic has been introduced as a game that lends itself extremely easily to mashups and crossovers. The many planes of Magic are their own unique worlds already, and visiting recognizable worlds from other IPs is just a logical extension of the change in scenery Magic players are already used to seeing on a set-to-set basis. This is a completely understandable attitude, and I personally hold absolutely no objection if you're just someone that enjoys playing a card game where Optimus Prime can face off with Bill the Pony. But Magic used to be a lot more than that, and I don't just mean that in a pretentious way. For decades, Magic has released nothing but original content, with its own worlds, characters, and carefully crafted storylines, displayed in the art and the flavor text on the cards themselves, as well as through additional media like novels and comics. The lore of Magic was unexpectedly deep, and as the years passed, Magic players became attached to Magic not just as a game, but as its own universe. But in recent years, original stories have become less frequent, and far less popular. Many of the story beats feel formulaic, often coming across as an afterthought, and major plot lines that should have been selling points for the lore of Magic have missed the mark entirely. It's difficult to see the increased focus on Universes Beyond as anything other than Wizards throwing in the towel on the idea of Magic as an IP, and to be blunt, turning a game with this much history into the tabletop equivalent of a cover band is downright embarrassing. Not because there's anything wrong with cover bands, but because Wizards already had a beloved discography with a lot of still untapped potential. But while the turn to other IPs might be embarrassing for Wizards' story group, it wasn't actively harming the game for most players up until very recently. The format most affected by Universes Beyond has been Commander, an extremely casual format that already heavily relied on Rule Zero. As a non-competitive social format, Commander provided an opportunity for non-Magic fans to play the game alongside Magic veterans, while using their favorite characters from pop culture without obligating anyone to play the game differently than the way that they enjoy it. There is quite literally no downside to printing optional Commander products that don't fit the Magic universe, and I would credit many of these products as being extremely useful for attracting new players to the game. What's different here is that adding Universes Beyond to competitive formats simply doesn't allow for that same degree of freedom. As much as I've tried, nobody has yet allowed me to rule zero at a competitive tournament, nor can you really afford to pass up on meta-breaking cards when a Marvel set is inevitably overpushed just because you don't enjoy the theme. A player searching for an opportunity to play Magic exclusively with Magic cards will not just find that such an endeavor is no longer popular, they'll find that that experience no longer exists. There is nothing wrong with making Universes Beyond accessible to new players, and I will even concede that the popularity of Universes Beyond justified making it legal in at least one 60-card format, if not multiple. But at the end of the day, the decision to not leave a single format intact without Universes Beyond is a blatant failure to serve a portion of the audience that one could very easily argue has been the core of Magic's success for decades. While I have absolutely no doubt that the Universes Beyond era of Magic will continue to be a gargantuan financial success, I cannot escape the feeling that a failure to return the loyalty of your most dedicated customers could very well return to bite Wizards sooner rather than later. Though I've spent the majority of this video whining about Universes Beyond, and I will continue for several more minutes, there's an argument to be made for the idea that the number of sets is going to be a much bigger problem than their contents. 6 full sets a year represents roughly 1,500 cards entering Standard yearly. And that's a fairly conservative estimate, assuming that every single set has 250 cards on the dot. Product fatigue is going to hit many Standard players harder than ever, and even non-rotating formats are going to warp at a speed that will make it extremely difficult for all but the most dedicated players to catch up. And while dedicated fans of Magic for Magic's sake can mostly be relied on to show at least a passing interest in the majority of new in-universe sets, there is a much less strong indication that someone who buys into Magic because they happen to be a fan of the newest crossover will continue to buy cards in any way, shape, or form once the flavor of the month moves on to an entirely separate property that they might not even be a fan of. But again, I want to reiterate that I'm not against the existence of Universe Beyond in general, though it may sound like I'm saying otherwise. Many of these crossovers are not my thing, but I can certainly appreciate that they bring the game to new audiences and are at least potentially extremely good for the long-term health and popularity of the game. But the constant stream of Universes Beyond products would be a lot easier to stomach if the in-universe products were also thriving. If the lore's current storyline wasn't such a flop, if the last several planes hadn't felt like paper-thin caricatures instead of believable worlds, if the return to Lorwyn hadn't been delayed, if Wizards took genuine care to maintain the health and identity of all of their formats instead of doing their best to make everything up to and including unsets legal in everything they possibly could as they transparently claw for greater and greater profit, then maybe Spider-Man being in Standard wouldn't bother me as much as it very clearly does. But none of that is the case. Not only is the One Ring playable in Modern, it's borderline mandatory for the majority of decks because they needed that set to sell well with competitive players too. Not only will iconic Spider-Man characters like Venom and Big Wheel be playable in Standard, but you won't be able to avoid them because formats without Universes Beyond no longer exist. And all the while, every single format will be mercilessly bashed with wave after wave of new cards as a new set comes out every 8 weeks. Think about how insane that is. There are some sets coming up that really do interest me, most notably the return to Siege Rhino's domain, but even if they reprint our king, his time in the sun will be over almost before it begins, as Wizards begins to reveal the next set and rolls out the red carpet for yet another pre-release. So, I've stopped playing as much. Though this video likely carries an air of righteous indignation, my day-to-day thought process is much more simple and noticeably calmer. These products are not for me, so I don't buy them. I've been enjoying other card games more, so I've been playing other card games more. The smaller card pool and comparatively simple card effects of Star Wars Unlimited have been an extremely welcome change in pace, so I've been focusing on that more, for example. Even Hearthstone has reclaimed its place in my daily routine after years of inactivity, since I just can't really manage to stay interested in Magic Arena anymore. Don't get me wrong, I'm not actively boycotting Magic. I'm not quite that self-important. I love Commander, and I still play fairly often with my friends, and I will continue to. I enjoy making Magic videos on this channel, and you can expect to see more in the foreseeable future. But it's not a coincidence that the playset of Bees of the Bounding Spring and Thoughtseize that I needed for my new Pioneer deck disappeared from my TCG player cart the very same day that the announcements all came out. And it's not a coincidence that a playset of Avenger and Super Laser Blast that I needed for my Star Wars Unlimited constructed deck suspiciously appeared in my cart later that same evening. Wizards has been putting forth a subpar product, and I'm losing interest. I like Marvel, I would consider myself a casual fan, and I occasionally find myself in a Marvel mood. I would not be surprised if in a few years I was the proud owner of a Hulk-themed Commander deck, for example. And honestly, the idea of a Marvel-centric format is actively interesting to me. But I'd also still like to be able to play Siege Rhino without seeing Patrick Star on the other side of the table. And without that option, I can't exactly promise the Marvel mood will hit me particularly often. And though I may be in the minority, I don't think I'm alone in that.